Greetings, family. We have the pleasure for our Kush Communiversity interviews to be speaking to the one and only, the Black History Man himself, brother Robin Walker, finally returning to gotkushTV. It's a pleasure to have you, bro.
No, thanks a lot.
As always. Right, bro. So obviously you've just done two presentations for us, I'm saying, for Kush University. We're going to be getting into that a little bit later on. First of all, I just want to start though by asking you about the role of the historian, in 21st century, particularly that the Black history or African-centered historian, and what we have to contribute to the forward development of Black people in 21st century.
Unfortunately, we're still in a world that looks at Black people as second class and inferior. Mm-hmm. We're still in a world where the alt-right are on the rise. Mm-hmm. So Black history still has to do what I said it should do in 2006 when I wrote When We Ruled. Mm-hmm. I said Black history was four things. Four things were context, methodology, scope, and definition. Now, the context is we're still in a world that says you people are inferior, you people have contributed nothing, you people have to justify why we should let you even live on this planet. And it doesn't matter where we are, everyone is saying the same thing. What have you contributed? Give me one reason why we shouldn't, we shouldn't evict you. And unfortunately, our history still has to be about challenging that. And that's why I'm very, very much about African glory. I'm very, very much about showing that Black people have contributed, not just history, but in the areas of literature, music, art, science, technology, religion, philosophy. Because unless that point is made and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, you're still going to have people saying, what's the point of Black people? And, why should we let them live on the planet?
So I was in a conversation the other day, and the question was being asked whether Pan-Africanists focus way too much on history and not enough on the future. There was a general consensus that is the case. Whenever we go to a Pan-African event or whatever, people are talking about ancient Ghana and Mali and Monomatapa and Bakongo, and there's not enough focus on how we're solving the problems of today and the future. Do you feel that's a fair critique?
No, it's not. I've never been to an event other than ones that I've done where people have spoken about Monomatapa or Congo. I've never been to those events. And if people are being honest, they haven't either. This is the point. A lot of people want to deflect from whatever it is you're talking about. I've done presentations where I'm talking about this is what Black people should be doing now.
Right.
People don't want to come to those events because it means work. It means not doing what you're doing right now, but doing what you should be doing. People don't want to hear that. And so what it is pretending that all we do is bang on about the past. It's just a way of avoiding what we're saying. Because if I did a presentation, which I will be doing, I've got presentations on history and wealth and what Black people should be doing right now. All those people that say all we do is live in the past, I want to see your butt at my events when I talk about them things. And same thing, if people want to talk about solving problems with knife crime and that kind of thing. When someone says, okay, this is the checklist. Point 1, this is what we need to do. Point 2, this is what we want. Watch all the people that say, you guys talk about the past too much. Watch them all bow their heads and then shuffle out, especially if you lay out a program for what they're supposed to do next.
Right. Indeed. Well, I can tell you this, that when we get Brother Robin back here again, we will be going into some of that financial literacy and economic development stuff and linking from the present to the past and to the future. So we'll do that at a later point. Touching on some of the presentation that you just delivered for us, first of all, on the ancient history of Black people in Britain. Now the first question I want to ask, because you started by talking about this shift in the historical landscape, whereby the oldest human finds are now in Morocco rather than in Ethiopia, which has been the case for at least a generation, because we had so-called Degnesh and Lucy, and then there was something found in Ethiopia that was older than that, correct? And now we've got Morocco, So now, the issue there is that most people tend to think that ancient North Africa was European. So do we need to continue to dispel that myth?
It never was European.
Right.
It never was. I mean, it is now,
Yes,
but that's a different story. Yeah, yeah. I mean, North Africa, the very first North Africans that we have documents about were the Egyptians, the Libyans, the Carthaginians, and the Moors. And all four groups of people are described as black, depending on whose documents you want to look at, right? Now, the first place to have significant non-black populations would have been Egypt and Libya. Certainly, there's a time period that the historians call the Second Intermediate Period in ancient Egypt, which is where we get the collapse of the Middle Kingdom, the collapse of your Amenemets and your Senusrets. And then Egypt is overran by Asiatics and the Hyksos. And depending on who you read, the Asiatics and the Hyksos were in power. Some people say for a couple of hundred years. I say for hundreds of years. And then from there, some of that population moved into Libya and began Caucasianizing the population of Libya.
Yes.
But the majority of Libyans still stayed black even during that period, right? All right, then we get the sea peoples, as they're called.
Right.
People coming in from the sea.
Mediterranean.
Yeah. And then they attack Egypt during the time of Ramses III. Diop goes into this in the greatest of detail. Again, they add to the non-black populations. Then we get the Roman conquest of Carthage in 146 BC. The Romans don't just conquer, they colonize. So they move families into North Africa. And so a lot of white North Africans are actually descended from that. Romans, Then we have the Vandals in the 5th century. These are people coming out of Germany. And they conquer North Africa in the 5th century. Their descendants are still around.
Right.
Then, of course, you've got the Arabs that conquered 639 AD. And they have added to the white population. Now, not every Arab is white, but the ones that are in North Africa most certainly are. Then you've got the Arab slave trade of Eastern Europeans. Yeah. And so a lot of Eastern Europeans got snatched. A lot of them ended up in the Middle East. A lot of them ended up in North Africa. Right. So again, a lot of white Arabs are actually Slavs. Right. And that they've again added to the variety of North Africa.
So when people talk about, because there's a distinct DNA marker called North African DNA, and I will question this as well, like with people, because what do they mean when they say that?
Because depending on which time period they took, they took the DNA. They could mean anything.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Because I mean, according to Chancellor Williams, some of the ancient Libyans were from China.
Right.
And so, in other words, you can say anything when you say
North African.
Right.
Okay. So then, last question on this specific thing.
Yeah.
Is the question of what people mean when they say Berber. Yeah. And so the question is, does historically speaking, is Berber a cultural designation or a racial designation or both?
It depends on who's writing the book.
Right.
From a strictly scientific scholarly perspective, there's no such thing, to be honest. There really is. But depending on what point you're trying to make, you can make different points. Right. Okay, so this is how I teach it. Okay, the first mention of the term Berber, as far as I know, is early medieval Arabs. There's a scholar called Wahib ibn Munabeh, writing around 738 AD. He says, among the descendants of Cush, the descendants of Ham, and he gives a list. And in that list is Barbar, Berber. Yeah, that means they're black. The black Arab scholar El-Jahis, he also says the Berbers are black. Then you've got the fact that you've got two populations that people call Berbers, Somalis and North Africans. Yes. Now, the Somalis are obviously black. What about the North Africans? Well, again, if we go back far enough, everybody in North Africa was black. Yes. So the Berbers today, when people talk about Berbers being Northwest Africans, the language Berber is Tamashek. Tamashek is what's spoken by the Tuaregs. Right. And the Tuaregs are mostly around your complexion, to be honest.
Yes,
yeah. And if you go to the ones in Niger, they're more kind of my complexion. Right. And when you go to some of the ones in the deserts, they're absolutely jet black. Absolutely. So in other words, you've got a whole Now, there are some light-skinned ones as well. And obviously, when you see books written by Europeans, they want to point their cameras at the palest ones and present them.
Yes, that's the original. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's interesting because the reason why I was asking this question and how it links to ancient Britain is because of the fact that if early, there is this assumption that basically blackness begins Sahara and below.
Which is nonsense.
And then there is whiteness, basically indigenous to Africa, so above the Sahara, in the mountains of Algeria and things of that nature. Yeah. So, but then the assumption coming from what you're saying would be that there is some migration pattern from Morocco, early Moroccan human, or this is Homo sapien, right? That kind of leaves the continent and ends up in Britain. Is that the case?
No, because no one is saying that the ancient people of Britain were black. We're not saying where they came from,
Right.
because you've got to remember at the time, if you go back far enough, the whole planet was black. So they could have come from anywhere.
Right.
Do you see? Not necessarily.
Okay.
They didn't hot-foot it necessarily from Africa.
Right. Okay.
Although they could have done, but we really don't know because we've got very little data. It's not like anyone was literate back in them days.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not making that claim. Then.
No.
We're not saying that people travel from Morocco to Britain.
No. They're just making the point that the first people in Africa were black.
Right.
The first people in America were black. And therefore, saying the first people in Britain were black isn't unusual.
Right.
Because at one time, it was a black planet.
Right. Point taken. So then, in this kind of brings us to a bit of a controversial issue in the political sphere now, whereby black people are who are of African descent around the world are claiming to be the original people of wherever we're found, based upon the fact that there are black people that are original to these lands. Does this have any historical foundation?
Probably not. But we have to be in each case, it's a little bit different. Let me give you an example. There are black people in Iraq who are descended from the Sumerians. There are black people in India who are descended from the people that built Indus Valley. There are black people in Australia who are descended from the first black person to set foot in Australia 70,000 years ago, whatever date we want to use. Do you see? So some of that does exist. Where we're on shaky ground, I think we're on shaky ground when we claim that black Americans are descended from the first people to set foot in America 14,000 years ago. Although, what I would say is, I think it needs research because there are too many holes in the mainstream perspective. And I can't pretend those holes don't exist. They do exist. And so for me, I would say needs more research in the American context. Because I'm not going to rubbish it out of hand because I can't if the mainstream perspective was tight, with the exception of Malian visitors, Olmec visitors, everybody in America, without exception, was Native American. If that was absolutely tight, I would say the people claim black Americans to be descended from the ancients. I would say chatting rubbish. But because I know the other side's position isn't tight.
Right. Which brings us to a classic work on that subject, which is They Came Before Columbus. Ivan Van Sertima. There's been a lot of critique of that book in a lot of black conscious circles. In fact, people are questioning the accuracy of his research. Where do you stand on the validity of that book?
I think the book is good. I think the book is great. Personally, there are holes in Van Sertima's work, but it's not the holes that the critics say it is. But there are holes. Let me tell you what the holes are. The main holes are, when you look at the pieces of evidence that Van Sertima presents, each one is solid. The problem is when you put them together, they don't tell one story. They tell different stories. Let me give you an example. There are burials of Negroes in the Native American burial grounds of the Olmecs. And in one burial ground, 13.5% of the people buried there are clearly Negroes, and 4.5% of a later one are clearly Negroes. All the haters of Van Sertima can't argue that. right? And you notice that the haters of Van Sertima don't even touch that because they can't argue with it. Right. Now, there's one piece of evidence. Okay, next piece of evidence. Ramesses II's mummy containing the presence of New World cocaine and nicotine in such quantities that it can't be accidental. Again, that would put you in prison. If you had that amount of
Yes.
they'd lock you up for that.
Yes. Yes.
So that
In
would,
modern day, yes.
yeah, that would meet the legal standard.
Right.
Here's the problem.
Right.
Van Sertima originally theorized that it was the 25th dynasty that got to the Americas.
Right.
If it's the 25th dynasty, Ramesses II is before that.
Right. Okay. Point taken.
Do you see?
Point taken.
And then Van Sertima rewrote the book and said Ramesses III.
Right.
But Ramesses II is still before that.
Yes.
So can you see? So there are things to critique.
Right.
But the critics of Van Sertima, frankly, they don't know what they're talking about, frankly.
Okay. All right. So don't throw in the book yet.
No. And even if we change the dynasty or the time period of who got to America, Van Sertima stuff will still stand up. Do you see?
Yes. I can't remember if he touches on this, but the presence of the Oyo Empire and this relationship, is it Oyo? And the materials that I found in West Africa.
That was me.
Right. Yes.
Now I got it from him, but
right.
I'm the one coming with that. Yeah,
yes.
I'm running with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The it's not Oyo.
Yeah.
Before there's Oyo, there's Ile Ife.
Right.
Which is Yoruba.
Yes.
Yeah. So Oyo's second capital,
Yes.
Ile Ife's first capital.
Yes.
Ile Ife, the capital is paved with corn cobs. Did you hear what I just said? You're paved with corn cobs. There's only one place you can get corn cobs in them days.
Yes.
America.
Right.
And so what happened was a German scholar called Leo Frobenius theorized there must be a connection between Yoruba and the Mayans.
Right.
He didn't say why he said there's a connection. He just said, I think there's a connection. Boom. And everyone then said he was nuts. And then I came across in Van Sertima the fact that the corn cobs is what's been used to pave Ile Ife. And then the scholars date the pavement at 1000 AD, which is 500 years before Columbus, or Combossos. So 500 years ago, the Yorubas of Ile Ife were talking to the Native Americans in order to get the corn cobs to pave the thing.
Yes.
And so I think that proves Frobenius correct. Yeah. So that's where I'm going with it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, again, ain't no one ramping with that unless people are going to claim an indigenous African origin for corn cobs.
Right.
And no one's claiming that.
All right, interesting point. So, in relation to now the black presence in Britain, and obviously the monument of Stonehenge is fundamental. So basically, from what the evidence that you brought, because black people have been theorizing this for quite some time, and this was considered a black conscious kind of conspiracy theory type thing. Yeah, but what you're saying is that there's actually documented evidence to suggest that it is a fact. That black people built Stonehenge.
Yeah, it is the point. The first person who actually put it in print, as you know, I quoted him, was the MP Samuel Lang, and he's getting it from the Physical Anthropology of Thomas Henry Huxley. Right, so that's it in print. This has got nothing to do with black people. This is 1866, brethren. They said that. Right now, the modern scholars aren't saying that. What they're saying is you've got Cheddar Man. And you've got a continuity of population.
Right.
Stonehenge gets built. Then there's a population change. Right, now that is another way of saying the same thing.
Right.
The question now is, what I'm saying is where our research needs to go is to prove was there no population change from Cheddar Man to Stonehenge. If there's no population change, then yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you see? And then that's now where our researchers should go.
So, in terms of the anthropology, is there any suggestion of why this monument was built?
Not really, no. You see, because the people who own it today are the Celts, the Druids.
Yes.
And they have their reasoning.
Right.
And their reasoning is it's associated with the sun and the moon and the solstice and the equinox and all that kind of stuff. And they may be right, but the problem is it's their reasoning. We don't know what the earlier people did it for.
Okay. So I guess that would be some reasoning then. Some research then in terms of the extent to which Celtic culture derives from the culture of these ancient peoples. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it could well be that the Celts have got it completely right. It could be that when they came here, they saw what was going on, they joined it, they became a part of it. It could be, and but yeah, that could be how it went. But what it is we would need to prove that.
Yes. Another hot topic on the table at the moment. I was at Speaker's Corner the other day. I was speaking to a Somali brother, and he was questioning. He had done some research on Nok civilization, and so he was questioning why people in West Africa who get inspired by African history focus on Kemet so much. Because he said, look at this big Nok civilization over here. Why are you focusing on trying to claim Kemet? Yeah, and obviously the second presentation you did today was around ancient Ghana, which is one of my favorites because to be ultra Afrocentric. It's a non-Islamic civilization in Africa that tends to not get a lot of limelight, as you suggested. Yeah. So looking into that now, because we know about Mansa Musa, and a lot of the kings of Mali and Songhai. The only king that people probably know of from Ghana and can say their name is Tenkamenin. Are there other kings that we need to whose names have been on earth that we need to know about?
Here's the problem. I've been through every word of the Tariq al-Fatash, every word of the Tariq al-Sudan, and there's only 4 Ghanaian kings that get mentioned. That's it, brethren.
Yes.
Kanasiai, 7th century, that he's in the Tariq al-Fatash. Tenkamenin and Bessie, they were usually mentioned together. I think they're
Bessie's just before Tenkamenin, right?
Yeah. And Yahya ibn Maris, who appears in the Tariq al-Fatash. And because of the name Yahya ibn, that sounds Islamic, but the context isn't. Whether that was a mistake. So most scholars just ignore it because they can't put it into any kind of context. They just think maybe that was a mistake. Or it could be that was his name and blah, blah. But that's all we have now. Now, it could well be that if we clean out the Timbuktu libraries, the Genet libraries, that kind of thing, it could well be that someone's got the thing. But that work hasn't been done yet, unfortunately.
Yes. Remind me of the number of texts in Timbuktu again?
Okay, depending on who you read, you get different answers. But one theory says 700,000. There's a white South African who says it's between 4 and 5 million.
Wow.
Yeah. But these texts could be duplicates, multiple copies of the Quran, multiple hadiths, that kind of thing. Yeah. All right. Then you've got manuscripts in Niger. I met a black man from France, or to be exact, he met me. He heard of me, he contacted me, we met up, and he's got personal manuscripts.
Okay.
Yeah. You've also got places like northern Ghana, where there's almost certainly manuscripts in places like Wana and them kind of places. Larabanga. Right. Then you've got what used to be ancient Ghana, places like Walata, Wadan, they've all got manuscripts. So there's a whole heap of stuff to clean out where we could find some of these things.
Right. And because of all of these things that you mentioned, like the overall majority have not been translated.
No. And this is the problem as well, because a lot of those places that have been colonized, French was imposed as the language of scholarship. A lot of the people that've got manuscripts can't read them because they've learnt, it's been beaten out of them. You understand? So people got manuscripts but can't necessarily interpret them.
Right. So you make a point of this in the book when we rule here, because you dedicate like a part of, that's a section of a chapter at the end of it to discuss the issue of Islamic civilization in West Africa in particular, and so in that respect, just to put this into context, when we're talking about Mali and Songhai, are these unique in relation to, let's say, Islamic civilization at the time, or are there other comparable Islamic civilizations in the world at that
Yeah,
time?
loads and loads and loads. But the reason I wrote that section is there's a view that a lot of particularly white scholars have that if a black person reads Arabic, worships Allah, that means he ain't black no more. And my argument is, cool,
Yeah.
argue that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say the same thing. If a white person reads Latin,
Yes.
bows their head to Jesus Christ, you're not white no more.
Right.
If you're going to say, but that, Islamic culture is Middle Eastern and therefore it's Asian,
Yes.
Christian culture is Asian.
Right.
Same argument.
Point taken.
Right, so my thing is, you want us to give up Timbuktu and Jenny, we'll give it up. You're going to have to give up Rome.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give up St. Peter's. You're going to have to give up, what's that one in central London?
The city of London?
Yeah, what's the monument there?
I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, no, it's
The one by Christopher Wren.
Can't remember.
Yeah, you're gonna have to give all that up.
Yeah.
And once you all give all that up, you ain't got nothing.
Yeah.
Straight.
So then the reason why I asked that question is
Yeah.
is to ask the question, to what extent is then Mali and Songhai, particularly Mali chronologically, just simply a derivative of the Ghana Empire?
It is. That's the point. And it's basically the Ghana Empire closed in Islam,
Right.
and the same is true as the Songhai Empire.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that they would do that are the same. Yeah. So for example, in Islam, the king is not God. Yeah. One of the reasons why how Islam changed politics was the king is just a politician. That's all he is. Under Christianity, the king is God's representative on earth. Yeah, under all previous religions.
Right.
So, in a Christian country, if you kill the king and say, "Right, I run things now,"
Yes.
you've committed an act against God, and it was believed that God will punish your country, create famines, droughts, blah blah blah. So if there's a famine or there's a drought, yeah, that's your fault, brethren. In Islam, they don't believe none of that. Your king is nothing more than a politician. That's it. Now, in West Africa, in Mali, Songhai, and so on, the king almost had the status of God. Yeah. So if the king died, there would be a crime wave because the gods died, and therefore the rule of laws died. So there'd be a crime wave, and the moment the next king does, everything stops again.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And there'll be certain rituals as well. Like if you were speaking to a West African king, you would have to get down on your ground like this, boof, hit your elbows into the ground, pick up dirt, and then throw it over you. Then you're in a position to speak to the king because you've got to show that level of humility. You understand? If the king is speaking to you, no, he's not speaking to you. He'll speak to his interpreter,
Right.
and the interpreter will speak to you because you're not worthy.
Yes.
And the king can't raise his voice. If he's got to shout at somebody, no, you'll speak to the interpreter, get the interpret, because he has to maintain protocol and dignity all the time. And in places like Hausaland, I was watching a documentary where how they do it with their emirs. There's a ritual where the emir is seated on the throne and his shoes are put down in front of him, because once he gets off the throne, he can't touch the ground. You've got to go, you see, and there's a whole thing about, because that's polluting. So the king has that kind of divine essence in Islamic Africa.
So how does what you said relate to the reports that we hear about Tenkameli, for example, as this fair and just king who maintained like a close relationship with his people? Do you know what I'm saying? And was very open to solving their problems, or you know what I'm saying? That kind of thing.
Yeah. But there'd be rituals associated with that. You see, what would happen is that there was, I mentioned in the presentation the night ritual, where at night they'd light this huge bonfire of logs. Then the king comes out, and then will sit on his platform of red gold. Right, that's one ritual. Then there'll be a ritual where at one point the king will walk around or ride around town. And there'll be a ritual where anyone that stops him can speak to him. But then there'll be another ritual where no one can speak to him.
Right.
And if you interrupt him on the second ritual,
Right. Yeah.
do you see?
Yeah.
So, but he's still a god king.
Right.
And even under Islam with Mansa Musa, he's about as close as you're going to get to a God king. Yeah?
Yes. So then, to cement the point just a little bit further, because you
Yeah.
mentioned what Ghana was trading in,
Yeah.
and basically Mali just basically inherits that trading,
Yeah.
and that's so the foundation of Mali's strength is the trade routes and the crafts that they inherit from Ghana. All right, okay, so that's that. The story of the origin of the Akan has been severely disputed, throughout history. So the idea, just to reiterate, is that the Soninke people, or a section of the Soninke people, travel south.
Yeah. Why people dispute it is, of
Right.
course, Soninke and Akan are very different languages.
Yes,
That's
yes,
what the dispute is.
Okay.
And that's why I present it as some people say, some people say.
Right,
And
right.
because one of the people that said it is Professor John Coleman de Graaf Johnson, who himself is Ghanaian, he says it, well, scholarship-wise, does it get any heavier hitter than him?
Right.
You see, and that's why I think it should be taken seriously.
Seriously, right.
But I do accept what the problems are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, because it seems like there's so much work still to be done.
Without a doubt,
Piecing
without a
together
doubt.
our history. Just what I'm saying, and like even if we're just talking about West Africa, and I'm emphasizing that because a lot of us in the diaspora come from West Africa, either
No, or central.
or Central. Yes.
Yeah, because I like to tell people that the fact being that if you're a black person, you're from the West, and you're alive today, and you've been alive for the last 200 years, you're more likely to be from Central Africa than West.
Yeah. But explain why that is, though.
Yeah, very simply, slavery was harsh.
Yes.
All right. If you were an enslaved African, you lasted 7 years before you were worked to death. You would have been replaced. So even though everywhere in Africa, and I mean everywhere, including North, was raided for enslaved people or people to be enslaved, we're not going to be descended from who got enslaved in the year 1400 or 1500. We're going to be descended from those that were enslaved at the very, very end.
Right.
And the last place to be raided was Congo.
Congo, yeah.
So those of us alive today would have been descended from that. Because the people that got raided before, you got captured in 1500, you'd be dead round about 1507, you'd leave no children behind, do you see?
Yeah, so that's a fact that's identifiable in a lot of the cultures in the Caribbean.
And what's more, if you get a bunch of people from Congo, get a bunch of people from the Caribbean, and I've heard it on both sides. Yeah, people can't tell each other apart.
Yes,
for real.
Yes.
Yeah.
Serious things. So so shout out to that. Yeah, so Western Central Africa.
Yeah.
But there's so, and then there's the idea of even the commonalities between the cultures and the languages in Western Central Africa that people are still doing work on today. So I've heard you say something before, which comes from Baba Yusuf Ben Yakanam, but this idea that the peoples of Africa are very well integrated with each other. What does that mean, and how far can we extend that argument?
Yeah, Ben Yochanan has this idea that if you wanted to cut Africa up the way white scholars used to do it, Negroes, Bantus, Hottentots, Bushmen, Pygmies, Danakils, Fuzzy White, all this kind of nonsense, yeah? The truth is everyone's intermarried with everybody else. Right. Then you've got the fact that everywhere in Africa, and for people who are from Africa, I know you don't want to hear this, but this is real. Everywhere in Africa got mashed up by the slave trade. I know people in Africa don't want to hear that, but that's real. That means everyone in Africa is a migrant from someplace else, or intermarried with migrants, or accepted migrants. Do you see? So if you're, say, Yoruba, it does not mean every one of your ancestors going back 100 generations is the ancestor of a Yoruba.
Right.
You don't know where those people came from. There would have been people dodging a slave raid from the Akan territories that would have ran there. Right. Somebody else dodging a slave raid, running from someplace else that would have got there. And when they got there, they would have intermarried with everybody else. Do you see?
So, and because it's an interesting point, because the general view, which is more and more coming, people are understanding that this is a colonial idea of Africans being these thousands of separate and distinct tribes, doesn't make any sense when we match it up to history.
Absolutely.
Right? So I'm saying, so the point is that, and it's like we talk as though, because the concept of Afro-Asiatic is basically an anthropological designation that specifies group of African people's interaction with non-African peoples, with people from outside Africa, generally speaking.
That's what the propaganda says,
Right.
but that's not what the evidence says.
Right.
Because Afro-Asiatic, as far as we know, originated, some people say Ethiopia.
Yes.
Some people say where Ethiopia meets Sudan on a map.
Yes, yes.
Some people put it further south, some people put it further north, but roughly that's where, in other words, you don't have to step outside Africa.
To get Afro-Asiatic.
Right.
Right. Yeah, point taken, yeah. But the point is that how it plays out culturally is with the idea, it's linked to the idea of being Semitic.
Right.
Semitic languages and these kinds of things, right?
True say.
So then you get other designations like Negro or Bantu and these kinds of things. And it's as though the peoples of Africa maintain separate and distinct identities for the duration of human
and that's impossible.
And didn't interact.
Yeah, it's absolutely impossible. Yeah, because here's the point. If it was a situation where there were huge walls that stopped people from going from A to B, and actually did stop people from going to A to B, you could claim that.
Yeah, right.
But no one is claiming that.
Right.
Then you've got the fact of migrations.
Right.
So, for example, Congo tradition claims that some of their people studied in Timbuktu. That means that if a Congo student was in Timbuktu, intermarried, that means that the children came up that would be part Negro and part Bantu.
Right.
If we're Congolese, that means we're Bantus, not even Negroes. If you want to get stupid with it.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah, sure.
Next thing is, I was reading a book on Jamaican linguistics. And did you know that a Jamaican family name back in the day was Malagasy?
No, I didn't know that.
Right, explain that.
Yeah, I can't.
Right, Jamaican word butu, meaning crude, ugly.
Yes.
That's a Swahili word.
Yes.
What's that doing in Jamaican Creole?
Right.
Yeah, that's East Africa, brethren. We were told there were no East Africans among us.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that another one. When we ruled, one of the things that blew my mind was Ibn Battuta was in Somalia, or what's now Somalia, the city of Mogadishu. And he explains in great detail that he was ushered to the sheikh's house, presumably the professor's house, and they fed him, and he lays out what they fed him: green banana, mangoes, chilies. He's laying it out, and he makes it quite clear: banana cooked before it is ripe.
Okay.
Now, I've never been to Somalia. I've been close. I've been Kenya.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, in Kenya, I was at the hotel that I stayed at. They served up what they called African spinach, and then I thought, I bet you I know what this is. It was kalaloo.
Yeah. Interesting. So then, okay, and finally then on this particular subject, I'm going to close.
Yeah.
Because the idea then of the so-called Bantu expansion,
Yeah.
And I've been having a lot of problems with this idea. I'm not well researching it.
It might be true.
Right.
It might be true.
That's what I was going to start. And what is because the idea, especially because you spoke about the alt-right, and a lot of them are using this Bantu expansion as to designate kind of African imperialism prior to the Europeans. So the Bantu just went around slaying people left, right, and centre. In particular, the Khoi and the Khoisan.
Yeah.
And basically just murdering. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where the Bantu expansion?
Let me answer that one. Unfortunately for the alt-right, white scholars have already dealt with that.
Right.
The claim that Bantus wiped out the Khoisan was already rubbished in 1975 by Roland Oliver. Now, for those people that don't know, Roland Oliver is about the most mainstream white historian on African history there is. He's the person behind the Journal of African History. So in other words, that's proper mainstream, almost colonial scholarship. Yeah, his argument is this. Looking at the interaction between the Bantus and the Khoisan, the Bantus did become dominant, but they became dominant because they built settled communities, whereas the Khoisan lived more nomadic communities. But it wasn't one group wiping out the other. It would have been Khois that moved into Bantu areas and intermarried.
Right.
So if you look at someone like Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela linguistically is Bantu.
Yes.
But if you look at his face, he looks Khoi. He's an example of intermarriage Do you see? So if one group wiped the other group out, that was through marriage. It wasn't through,
Right.
you know.
Right. Okay, beautiful. So then, connecting all this together now, yeah, going back to where we started in terms of the role of the African historian. Like, in terms of young future generation scholarship, what is it that we need to be doing now, in your humble opinion, as a Black History man, to develop powerful scholars in the next generation?
First of all, people should do the reading, and my book's a good place to start. But you don't have to start with me. Start with anybody: Chancellor Jackson, Ben Yochanan Diop, Van Sertima, Rashidi. You can start with anybody.
Yes.
But do the reading. And when you're doing the reading, learn two things: the truth, and you need to know the lies better than the liars know the lies. So that way, when people chat rubbish, you can discard. But the most important thing you've got to do is produce books. We still have no definitive account of ancient Egypt from a Black perspective. Now, I have been commissioned by an organization to write one, and I've submitted my papers.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to play out, but the main point is, if anyone writes one, I'm in the list.
Yes, sir.
But where's everybody else at?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Now, people like Azar Imhotep and them kind of man say, if you're listening to this, bro, yeah, me and you go back in the day, yeah, you'll know this. We go back in the day. We used to be on the same chat room, yeah. Bro, produce some books. Not ones on linguistic connections between X and Y and Z, yeah.
Okay.
Books on, because someone with his intellect,
Right.
yeah. In other words, a history book on Kemet. That's your thing.
Right.
Kick it.
Right.
Let's see the product.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, in other words, it should be a situation where people could buy mine, buy his,
Right.
buy yours, buy next man's,
Right.
and then we don't have to agree, but we're all kicking it from different angles.
Yes, yes,
but
yes.
producing real history books that an ordinary Joe Schmo can read and learn something. And then let's go through all the civilizations. Someone should kick it on Kemet, someone should kick it on Kush, someone should kick it on Carthage, Numidia, the Nox civilization, Yoruba, Igbo, Benin, Hausaland, Kanem-Bornu, medieval Nubia. You name it, we just go after one, deal with it, deal with it. So it's a situation that I can go into a library and I can pick up your book on Kemet. I can pick up Azar Imhotep's book on Kush. I can pick up somebody else's book on the Nok. Yeah, and everyone is dealing with the thing.
Yeah.
So now we could argue about, but what about the linguistic exactitude?
Right.
Sorry, we don't need linguistic exactitude to write them things.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
In other words, make that a side project while you're writing them things. Do you see?
It would help though, in the sense of the fact that if we've got more people that are able to read the text,
It helps, yeah.
right, charting a history from the text should be easier. Today, more today than it's ever been.
Absolutely true.
in the history,
Absolutely
you know
true.
what I'm saying? So yeah, I do take your point. Just to reinforce it slightly, because I read a lot of books that are anthropological in nature, and we're still at a point whereby most of the books, the authoritative texts on African culture, spiritual traditions, and social traditions, are written by Europeans. Anthropologists from the 1800s up until the present day. So it's very important what the Black History Man said, kings and queens. I want you to just note that, and just to know that there's a lot of work for our future next generation of historians to do in these areas. You know what I'm saying? Do you have a last word before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say big up to the Kush posse. This has been a lot of fun, and yeah, keep doing it and make more things happen.
Thank you very much, Robert Robin.
Big up.
Family, it's the Black History Man, you know. Please be aware of the privilege, that it is to have such scholars, not just in our world African community, but in our UK African community, kings and queens. Make sure, we treasure the gems that we have right here. Always remember, you ain't got nothing if you ain't got Kush.